People would say, I just don't have time though. I just don't have time to change Airman Snuffy. I just don't have time to. It doesn't take that long sometimes. We'll talk about that a little bit later, how easily that it can be done. And we'll show you some examples of that. So, one thing we do know about human beings though is that human beings will they make their decisions and they'll do things that they perceive to be in their best interest. The things that we do day to day usually are things that we think are what we want to do, what we need to do, they're in our best interest. And so back several years ago, Henry Kissinger was Secretary of State under Richard Nixon. He's a recognized expert in international relations. He was asked, can we trust the Russians? Dr. Kissinger's response was, we can absolutely trust the Russians to do what they believe to be in their best interest. So if we can shape that, if we can shape what they perceive to be in their best interest, we can change their behavior. So it can be done. For those of you who have a hard time reading this in the back, don't mistake this fake smile and professional body language. I'd punch you in the throat if I knew I wouldn't lose my job. Wouldn't it be nice to know if we got airmen in our units that feel that way? I've had leaders, not too long ago, had one. A couple times I'd like to punch him in the throat, but I knew that wasn't in my best interest to do that. Better yet, wouldn't it be nice to know that we didn't have any airmen in our units that felt that way? Or if they started feeling that way, that we could communicate with them, we could make those connections and figure out that that's how people felt. People sometimes don't even know, though, what's in their best interests. And sometimes we can help shape that when we're talking about particularly young airmen. So, here's this thing that's called the thinking paradox. So, this theory of determinism, and I hate to even say that because I don't want to get into theory, but suffice it to say that we are the result of our life's experiences and knowledge. We go through life and we experience things and we build what we call these green blocks of experience or these green blocks of knowledge. We know that, when we were a kid, we were in the kitchen, we put our hand on a hot stove, we got burned. All right, that's not a smart thing. I'm not going to put my hand on a hot stove anymore. That's a green block. We file that away. All the things that we see going on around us that we believe to be true and trustworthy, that we can rely on, each of those things are green blocks, and we all build these piles of green blocks. And that's who we are. And the reason it relates to the theory of determinism is because, to a large extent, that's how we can anticipate, that's how we can go through life. Based on our experiences, we've seen this happen before. After I've seen this happen, this is usually what follows. So that's how we make a lot of our decisions, based on what's happened to us before and what we know. Now, that's not always a bad thing. How do we cross the street? Man, if you had to think about everything, every decision every act that you made, you had to really think it through, the steps, getting ready in the morning. If you had to think through, okay, first I got to get in the shower, and then I got to shave. That's a good thing. But it can get us into trouble, because not everything can be determined. We don't know everything. When we're talking about human beings, there's all this uncertainty stuff out there, right? Even though we know a lot of stuff about our backgrounds and our knowledge and our experiences, we probably don't know very much about the person's green blocks who's sitting next to us. We've all been part of this Air Force for a number of years, but every one of us has had different experiences in the Air Force, and so every one of us has a little bit different view, a little bit different taste of the United States Air Force. And so when we get into trouble is when we forget that other people have different green blocks than we do. But back in the day when these theories were being developed, the man Laplace, back in the 1700s, he combined these two things, and he says, if I take what I know, but I realize there are some things that I don't know that I can't account for, and if I combine those things at least, and realize that there's some things I don't know, I'm going to at least increase the probability, and that's where the theory of probability came from. Increase the probability that I'm going to make good decisions or that I'm going to build good relationships. There's a lot of different applications for this. And so we're going to talk about this as we go through. What happens when we get stuck in our green blocks? Those people, some people that just live, they build this wall around them of green blocks. And man, you're not going to change the way they do things. They've been doing it that way for so long. That's the way we've always done it. I'm not changing now. that can lead to some real problems as we go forward. So we combine your perception, other perceptions, we get a shared perception, we increase the probability of success in a lot of things that we do. All right, so that's the way we think, that's where our background comes into play. Another thing that we need to talk about, you need to understand in human behavior is this idea of in-group psychology. This idea that we are desperate to be part of a group. We are desperate to fit in, to have that sense of belonging to something. Everybody belongs to different groups. If I went in your closet, if you went in my closet, you'd see, okay, I'm going to put it out there, I'm trying to be transparent here. I'd see Green Bay Packer jerseys. I'm just saying, trying to be transparent. You'd see Chicago Cubs t-shirts. You'd see San Antonio Spurs stuff, So, that's where we get some of our identity, right? Who are the groups that we associate with? Who do we like to be associated with? That's where some of our psychology comes from, or some of our identity. So, this young man, Ernest Shackleton, if you know his story, he probably goes down in the annals of history as the worst marketing man ever. Ernest Shackleton, back in 1914, well, probably actually started before that, 1913, decided he wanted to be the first man to cross the Antarctic Peninsula by sled, on foot, not flying over it. And so he knew he couldn't do it by himself. And so he went through his calculations. He figured out he needed about 25 or 26 other people on this team to be able to make this mission successful and cross the continent. So he put this ad, that's where he went. He put this ad out in his local newspaper. For those of you in the back of the room, it says, "Men wanted for hazardous journey, small wages, bitter cold, long months of complete darkness, constant danger, safe return doubtful, honor and recognition in case of success."
Oh my God, that was real?
That's the ad that he ran in his paper, looking for 25 people to join him on this mission. 5,000 men responded.
Oh, wow.
5,000 people wanted to be part of this. They wanted to be part of something bigger than themselves. They wanted to belong to this, to say, I was part of that. Assuming they survived, right? 5,000 people. We do crazy things to belong, to increase our sense of identity of who we are. Sometimes we will change our behaviors to be part of that group. For the longest time, I was always amazed at the actions of gang members. These young kids that get into gangs and they do these horrendous things. And for the longest time, it was kind of naive, but I was like, why the heck? Why would people do some of these things? For a lot of these young kids, they have never had that sense of belonging. They've never had that identity, and the gang gives them that for the first time. And then once they've got them, they'll make them do all kinds of things, and they're willing to do horrendous things to maintain belonging to that group. Our brains are wired. We could go on for quite a while about talking about the chemicals that flow in our brain when we do these kinds of things, when we have that sense of belonging. We are wired that way to belong, to have be part of a group bigger than ourselves. And when you talk about how easy is it to get people to change their behavior, watch this video.
To answer that question, we set up a hidden camera experiment to see if this woman would stand up at the sound of this tone, simply because everyone else is. You might be thinking you'd never go along with this. Or would you? After just 3 beats, and without knowing why she's doing it, this woman is now conforming perfectly to the group. But what happens if we take the group away?
Elaine, please.
Now she's alone, the crowd is gone, and nobody is watching her, except our hidden cameras. What do you think she'll do? She's now conforming to the rules of the group without them even being there. Now, watch what happens when we introduce another outsider who doesn't know the rules.
Have a seat and they'll be out in just a couple minutes. Thanks so much.
Think she'll teach the new guy what to do? We kept the cameras rolling as more unsuspecting patients arrived.
This guy's enjoying it.
And slowly but surely, what began as a random rule for this woman has now become the social norm for everyone in this waiting room. Here to explain what's going on in their brains is Jonah Berger of the University of Pennsylvania.
This sort of internalized form of herd behavior is part of what we call social learning. Starting at a very early age, when we see members of our group perform a task, our brains literally reward us for following in their footsteps.
When I saw everybody stand up, I felt like I needed to join them. Otherwise, I'm like excluded. Once I decided to go with it, then I felt much more comfortable.
Conformity is how we become socialized, but it can also cause us to develop bad habits or repeat past wrongs.
And it's why even this rebel, who wasn't standing for any of this nonsense, eventually joined ranks. And the only thing more shocking than seeing how easily conformity affects the way you act is that similar forces are subconsciously shaping the way you think right now.
You know, that was an organization, that was a group of people that, I mean, she didn't even necessarily want to be part of. And did you hear what she said? When I finally did it, I felt better. I felt like I fit in, you know. We are just wired that way. Sir?
Why did nobody go up to the secretary and ask, why is there a buzzer? Why is there
We don't have time. That would take away from some of the interesting parts. So, imagine though, when you want to fit into a group, when you're purposely looking for a group to fit into, what you will do, how you will change your behaviors to fit into a group. So we just need to be aware of that, and that we ourselves are that way, and our young airmen around us are that way, absolutely. And we'll talk more about that a little bit later on. Again, this idea it's based on our perceptions, and do people have that trust, loyalty, and commitment that we mentioned earlier? That makes them even more susceptible and willing to change their behaviors. And that we have the ability to have that impact on people around us. Our airmen, they want to belong to something. And if we don't give them something positive to belong to, they'll find something to belong to. Wouldn't it be nice if it was a positive alternative? I'm going to give you several suggestions on things to read today. You want to talk about group behavior and what happens and how successful people can be when they do submit to the group, and the rewards from that. Boys in the Boat, about the rowing team back in 1936 or 1940 Olympics, I can't remember now. They rowed and won the gold medal and won it in front of Adolf Hitler, of all places. So just a great story about what can happen when you join the group. All right. So, as I said, we all have different ways of looking at things. Our green blocks are not the same, but we can shape that perspective. We can shape those perceptions over time as leaders. All right. So we're going to change gears here a little bit. Now we talked about in-group psychology. Now we're going to talk about systematic thinking, another way our brain works. our brain, to a large extent, likes to be able to anticipate things and likes to know what's going to happen next. And we just operate that way in a lot of ways, right? And we can use that to our advantage. I don't say that in a bad way, but being aware of how the human mind works can give us advantages as leaders. So systematic thinking, we know that certain things happen in certain orders, and then we can predict what's going to happen next. When I flew in here, when I landed at SeaTac yesterday, I expected that the pilot was going to put the landing gear down before he put the plane down on the runway, right? I just expect that. That's the way certain things are going to happen. My green blocks tell me that's the way things are going to happen. If I ever go into the operating room, I expect that the anesthesiologist is going to do his or her job before the surgeon comes in to do his or her job, right? If I had to go back in time, I think I would have taught my kids how to play chess, because chess is such a great way of developing that systematic thinking, that our actions have consequences, that certain things happen before other things, and this is what these things lead to. So this can be used to even in pretty complicated situations, we can use this to our advantage to kind of bring people to a common destination, even when it seems like it's pretty complicated to do that. So, all right, I'm going to have to do a little exercise here. You're going to have to do a little math. So, if you need to break out the scratch pads and calculators, feel free. So, I want you to think of a number between 1 and 10. A whole number between, there's always one in the crowd. A whole number between 1 and 10. Get that in your mind. I want you to multiply that number by 9. Okay? Now, if you start out with 1, if you have a 9, then, as a result, just use that number. But if you have a 2-digit number, I want you to add those 2 digits together. Okay? Pick a number between 1 and 10. Multiply it by 9. Add the 2 digits together. I want you... What? I want you to subtract 5 from it. Shh. I want you to subtract 5. Now, I want you to, whatever number you have, I want you to pair that up with a letter in the alphabet. So if you've got a 1, then it's an A. If it's a 2, it's a B. If it's 3, if it's C, and so on. So get that letter, pair that number to a letter. Now I want you to think of a common country that starts with that letter that you came up with. Okay, so a country that starts with that letter. Now I want you to think of the letter that country ends with. The last letter in that country's name. I did this with an international audience recently in Italy. It didn't go over so well because they spell things differently than. So. Take that last letter. Now think of an animal that starts with that letter. The last letter of that country. What's an animal that starts with that same letter? And now think of the country where that animal normally comes from. What country you normally associate with that animal? Do I have anybody in here who's thinking of a kangaroo from Australia that started in Denmark?
I put a kitten.
Quite a few folks. I found that as we get more global, that exercise doesn't work as well because people are thinking of Djibouti instead of Denmark, and some people think of koalas instead of kangaroos. But that systematic thinking, if you know kind of how people's minds work, you can use that to your advantage to bring them to an end state. All right. But that doesn't always work. It didn't work for everybody in here. Usually I get about 70% of the folks or so that'll go that way. But you got to be aware that even in simple situations, you can't always rely on things like that. That sometimes it doesn't work too well. All right, so we're going to try another exercise. I want everybody to put their hands straight out in front of them. Okay. Put your palms facing down. And now turn them again so that your thumbs are facing down, your palms are facing away from each other. All right. I want you to take your left hand, put it over your right hand, and interlock your fingers. Left hand over the right hand. You with us, man? You good? Okay. All right. And now I just want you to rotate them up. No, just rotate them up.
Yours are not crossed when you started that.
How easy is that? Come on, that's not that hard, right? All right, so it doesn't always work. It doesn't, even though sometimes we think, I know what his green blocks are, I know what my green blocks are, we can get to this situation, we can get to this destination together. It doesn't always work. I just want to point out that it doesn't always work every time. All right, so you got to be aware of that. All right, so here's something. Here's another way the brain works. How many pairs of animals, not how many single animals, how many pairs of animals did Moses bring onto the ark?
He did it.
How many pairs of animals? 2 pairs.
Oh, wait a minute. Sorry. No.
1 pair?
One pair.
of animals?
Yeah, 1 pair.
How many pairs of animals did Moses bring on the ark?
Oh.
All right. So, here's the thing.
No.
Daniel Kahneman wrote this really cool book called Thinking Fast and Slow. He's I think he won the Nobel Prize back a while ago for economics. But he wrote this book and he says that our brains have these kind of 2 systems inside. We have a system 1 and a system 2. System 1 is that quick thinking brain, that one that's usually engaged, doesn't take much energy, and is making decisions for us and jumping the gun. I mean, it's good in a lot of cases, but our brain can make decisions without us even realizing it sometimes. The point of that exercise was we kind of size up this thing without really looking at it. Our system 1 brain says, okay, I know a little bit about the ark and the animals and stuff. How many pairs? We skip right over the Moses thing because the Moses kind of fits in there, right? Kind of
Somewhere along the way.
time frame, more or less, in history. And our system 1 makes those decisions for us, and we don't even realize. But it can get us into trouble because we jump to conclusions. We make decisions based on incomplete information, right? But luckily we have this system 2 side of the brain, which doesn't engage as often because it takes more energy. It's more that logic, rational side of the brain. It does engage, but not very often. Usually when we're in a kind of our happy place and things are going along smooth, our system 1 side of the brain's kicking along, it's keeping us out of trouble, I mean, deciding when to cross the street or not, when to, how a lot of simple decisions that we make during the day. But when there's some kind of cognitive strain, when something doesn't seem quite right, that's when our system 2 side kicks in. That's when we start to, wait a minute, let me think about this. Something's not quite right about this. Seems too easy. This seems to, whatever. That's when our system 2 side kicks in. The problem is it doesn't kick in sometimes soon enough. Sometimes we need to be a little bit more intentional about engaging that system 2 side of the brain so we don't make those bad decisions. Okay. It's just interesting that our brain sometimes is working on autopilot and we don't even realize it. But it can take us down some bad roads if we're not aware of that. So Thinking Fast and Slow is the book by Daniel Kahneman if you're interested in that. All right, so let's talk about the way our brain works and how it thinks. Talking about biases and blind spots for a minute. If you can't read that in the back, it's 2 professors. He says, "Did you read my paper on confirmation bias?" And the other guy says, "Yes, but it only proves what I already knew." That's confirmation bias. We only pay attention a lot of times to the things that we already think we know. We'll talk about that in just a second here. So here's a bunch of different types of biases. Not going to go over each one of these. Confirmation bias, though. If I asked you, are you more liberal or conservative? I'm not going to ask that because I don't want to get into politics, but I would imagine that most of us watch a certain type of news channel depending on what our views are. Typically, more conservative people watch, say, Fox News, or liberal people watch some of the other networks. Why is that? Why don't we watch the other news? My wife is good about doing that. She'll actually tune in to the other side just to see what the other side is saying. But I don't like listening to people who are disagreeing with me. I like to listen to people that are talking my language. So I tune into my news source. But that's that confirmation bias. And so we can miss out on a whole lot of good information if we tend to just listen to the things that agree with the way we think. That's bias. Anchoring, halo effect, when somebody's got either a good or a bad reputation, that just sticks with him. You know, oh man, he's a screw up. He can't do anything right. So I'm not going to give him any projects because he'll just screw it up because he's always screwed up things in the past. Well, how is that kid ever going to get a break? How is he ever going to get a chance to break out of that if you don't take a chance on it? That's a negative example of the halo effect. Overconfidence, groupthink. You know, get into a group of people and we all kind of tend to herd in the same general direction. All right. So our biases can get us into trouble because we just don't see things the way that they really are in some cases. If I was to ask you to describe it, how would you describe this? What does this look like to you? A whirlpool, tunnel, kind of spiraling down, right? Down into smaller and smaller. Well, if I told you that this wasn't a spiral, this wasn't a whirlpool, this wasn't anything like that, that these were just actually concentric circles, you'd think, that doesn't make any sense. But let me paint a few of them for you. Follow that one all the way around. That's not right. If you follow them around, they're actually concentric circles. It's just that our brain has seen a lot of spirals. Our brain has seen a lot of whirlpools. And so when you glance at that, I've seen something like that before, so that confirmation bias kind of thing kicks in. I've seen this, so that's what it looks like. Now, granted, it was drawn to deceive you, right? I mean, so that's part of the purpose here. But our point is that you can't always trust that system one side of your brain that's making those decisions for you. Sometimes you need to engage a little bit more than that. All right. So work with me. People at this time when I do this presentation, people are like, I'm on to him. He's trying to trick me. Just though when you glance at this, which circle, this circle or this circle, looks bigger when you first glance at this picture? One. Thank you. I put this up there and say, which one's bigger? And then people are like, they're the same. I'm like, come on. When you first look at that. But the point is, this one looks bigger because of what it's surrounded by, right? It's surrounded by smaller things. This one is kind of dwarfed. This one, actually, those are exactly the same size, those two center circles. But this one looks dwarfed because the things around it are so much bigger. What does that have to do with anything? All right, well, let's pretend that the one on the left is you. The one on the right is your young airman. We're all dealing with similar issues, right? We all have financial situations that we're in. We all have family situations. We all have work situations that we're in. Just because you see something one way, because you've probably got a lot of this stuff under control, because you've been around for a while. You're a young airman, homesick? Come on, I've been away from Wisconsin longer than I ever lived there. So, I mean, I still like to go back. I'm not homesick, but a young airman? Could be. Finances? Hopefully by this time we've kind of got our finances figured out. Young airmen? I know there's some young airmen that are in this world of hurt from buying that Mustang or buying that whatever, get themselves. The things that are surrounding them affect them differently than they affect us. Now that may sound very trivial or very obvious to say that, but sometimes we forget that. And we view things differently than our airmen view them. And so we just need to be aware of that. All right. So how do we do that? How do we overcome these biases and these blind spots? Sometimes we just get too busy. Sometimes we're just moving too fast. We got so much on our plate. You know, you all, reservists, I can't imagine doing two different jobs. You all got this weekend gig or however often you come in, and then you got another full-time job during the week. Or even arts. I mean, that you're a civilian during the week, and then you're military on the weekend. I mean, that just boggles my mind, And so you guys can juggle these things. I can only imagine what you guys have to deal with sometimes. So sometimes we just got to slow down. Sometimes we got to delegate. There's some things that we take on that sometimes we don't actually have to. If we can just delegate or prioritize and get rid of some of those things that cause us noise, that will help. I think this talk less, listen more, I don't think it's a mistake that we have two ears and one mouth, right? Maybe we should listen a little bit more than we talk. A lot of people like to hear themselves talk. Maybe we need to listen a little bit more. and just ask that question, what am I missing? Is my system one brain kicking in here and making decisions that I don't even realize? Or is there a chance that I'm missing something? That will help us overcome these biases and these blind spots. All right, so we talked a little bit about biases. Blind spots now are kind of a bias taken to the ultimate extreme. That sometimes things we won't even see them. It's not that we don't see them correctly, it's we don't see them at all. And Rob, this is where the lights are going to come into play. We got busy things. I mean, our lives are busy with all different kinds of things, right? I mean, there's, like I said, I can't even imagine all the different things that you guys are juggling. So on this next slide, if anybody can turn the lights, if you get the light switches, I think Rob's got this under control. This works better if in a dark room. And I will tell you right now, this works better the closer you are up to the screen. This has more impact. So those of you in the back, please bear with us for a minute. But on this next slide, I want you to look at the green dot in the center. I want you to focus on the green dot in the center of the screen. But I want you to kind of peripherally, I want you to count how many times the yellow dots around the outside disappear off of the screen. Okay, so focus on the green dot in the center, but try to count how many times the yellow dot disappears, yellow dots. So here we go. Focus on that green dot in the center. Just on the green dot. Just be paying attention to how many times the yellow ones disappear. Focused on the dot in the center. Okay, let's turn the lights back on before anybody falls asleep. All right, so particularly from you folks kind of in the front half of the room, how many times did the yellow dots disappear?
A bunch.
30? 36? 13? A lot of times, right? Did they disappear less for you in the back? They didn't disappear for you? Okay. So up here, here's the experiment. 30 sometimes, some people 13 times, all different range. If we had time, I'd go back and play that video again and have you just focus on the yellow dots and tell me how many times they disappear. The yellow dots never disappear. The yellow dots never go away. The blue stuff in the background is the noise that's kind of overwhelming our brain. And so our brains can only handle so much stuff. And once you reach that point, once you go past that point and oversaturate the brain, things start falling off. Things start, as we say in the flying business, things are falling off the radar scope, right? You don't even see them anymore.